I had not lost an argument in 11 years. I had not been laughed at, openly, at my own table, in longer than that. Both records ended on the same evening, over the same bowl of soup, because of the same woman, and I have never once wished either record restored. She was not announced. Companions never are. She came in 2 steps behind the Dowager Lady Esher, in a grey dress with no lace on it anywhere, no jewel, no ribbon, nothing a man's eye is meant to catch on, and yet I caught on her before the first course was cleared, the way you catch on the one unfamiliar object in a room you know by heart. She took the chair at the foot of the table as though the foot of the table were exactly where she meant to sit and nowhere else would have suited her half so well. I was the Duke of Penhallow. They called me the Iron Duke in 3 counties, and I had let them, because the name kept the conversation short and the petitioners brief and the dinners, as a rule, entirely predictable. I expected 3 things at any table I sat at: agreement, deference, and silence unless I had asked a question. 22 guests gave me all 3 without trying. Lady Esher's companion gave me none of them, and seemed not to notice she'd broken a rule that had stood, unbroken, since I was 26. "You've not touched your soup, Your Grace," she said, halfway through the second course, to a table that had gone quiet the moment I frowned at the bowl. "I'd have thought a man of your reputation could manage broth." Lady Esher's fork stopped in the air. Someone's wife made a small sound into her wine and pretended it was a cough. "I find," I said, in the voice that generally ended conversations, "that I prefer not to eat what's gone cold." "Then you've been served twice tonight," she said, without lowering her eyes, "for I hear the same complaint made of your manner, Your Grace, and that's been cold since Michaelmas." The table laughed. I want it understood, because it has mattered to me every day since, that they did not laugh at her. They laughed at me, openly, in my own house, under my own roof, the way no table had laughed at me since I was a boy too young yet to silence a room by entering it. "Leave us," I said to her, because it was the only weapon left in my hand, and I used it badly, and I knew it the moment it left my mouth. She did not flush. She did not reach for the door. She set down her spoon with the particular, deliberate care of a woman who has decided a thing and will not be hurried out of deciding it. "I'll leave gladly, Your Grace," she said, "the moment you tell the table what station, exactly, permits a man to be rude to his soup and call it dignity." I have turned dukes pale with less than that sentence. I have ended whole dinners with half of it. I sat instead with my jaw working and no answer anywhere in me, and the table laughed again, warmer this time, the laugh people give when they have just watched something rare happen and are grateful to have been present for it. She rose on her own terms. She curtsied on her own terms, low and correct and somehow still a small act of defiance. She left the room as though she had won a wager rather than been dismissed from it, and I sat through the rest of the dinner hearing none of what was said to me, tasting nothing, the soup gone colder still and entirely beside the point. I did not sleep well. I told myself, lying awake and furious at the ceiling, that it was the soup. I had stopped believing myself by the time the candle burned out. Her name, I learned the following morning from my sister, was Margaret Doyle, and she had been 4 years a companion to a dowager who collected sharp women the way other women collected porcelain, for the pleasure of having something in the house that could not be broken by ordinary handling. She corrected the bishop on Tuesday, Caroline told me over breakfast, delighted in the particular way of a woman watching her brother lose a fight he doesn't yet know he's begun. About scripture, Robert. He thanked her. He thanked her. He said it was the first honest conversation he'd had at a country house in a decade. Caroline buttered her toast and did not look at me, which I have since learned is exactly how she delivers her most dangerous observations. "You looked very put out at dinner." I was insulted at my own table. "You were corrected at your own table," she said, "which I gather is not a thing that's happened to you since father died, and I confess I rather enjoyed watching it happen at last." I found Margaret in the library 3 days later, not looking for her, or telling myself I wasn't, which amounts to the same dishonesty dressed in better clothes. She had a book open across her knees and her shoes off, tucked beneath her like a girl half her composure, and she did not stand when I entered, which no one under that roof had failed to do in a decade. "Don't," I said, before she could decide to. "I wasn't going to," she said. "My feet have settled the matter. You'll have to make do with my voice instead, Your Grace, since the rest of me has declined to rise for you. That voice has been trouble enough for 1 week." "It has," she agreed, entirely without apology, "but you keep returning to whichever room I happen to be in, which tells me either the trouble suits you, or you've a very poor sense of direction for a man who owns this many corridors. I had, in fact, walked the wrong way twice that week expressly to pass the library door, a fact I would not have confessed under torture and confessed to myself instead, standing there, with considerable irritation. What are you reading? Something you disapprove of. A woman writing at great length about how little use she has for dukes. And do you find her persuasive? I did, she said, not lifting her eyes from the page, until last Tuesday. She said it so plainly, so without flourish, that it took me a full breath to understand what she'd given me, and that was the only reason I believed it, and the only reason it undid me as thoroughly as it did. A glove dropped, not thrown. I left before I said something neither of us could have walked back from afterward. I have since decided that was the night I lost the argument I'd been quietly having with myself since the soup, though I would not have admitted defeat for another week at least. She did not soften toward me, not the way the word is usually meant, all blushes and lowered lashes. She did not grow shy or careful. She corrected me at cards, twice, and was right both times. She corrected me about the weather coming in from the west, and was right about that too, infuriatingly. She told the vicar's wife, well within my hearing, that I was tolerable when not defending his own dignity, which is most of the time, but improving by the week. I caught myself listening for her voice before I'd even entered a room, the way other men listen for music they've grown fond of without quite choosing to. There is a particular fear that comes to a man who has spent 11 years being agreed with, the fear that no one has told him the plain truth in a decade, and that he would no longer recognize it if it arrived at his door. Margaret Doyle arrived like a woman who had never once in her life been afraid of telling a duke he was wrong, and somewhere in that week I understood that I had been starving for exactly that, and had spent 11 years calling the hunger pride, because pride was a great deal easier to live inside than honesty. The house parties last evening fell soft and gold, the kind of dusk that makes even a cold stone house look briefly forgiving. I found her at the garden's edge, where the lawn gave way to the old wall and the last light caught the gray of her dress and made it look, for one unfair moment, like silver rather than the plainest cloth in the house. You've been avoiding me, she said, without turning, as though she'd heard my step and known it before I did. Which I find very poor manners in a man who started all this by being rude to his soup. I have not been avoiding you. I have been managing an estate. You've been managing an estate past my window 4 times a day this week, Your Grace. The estate must be very small, or very confused, or both, to require quite so much pacing. I had no answer for that either. I had begun, I realized, to keep a private accounting of every occasion on which she had left me with nothing to say, and the ledger was growing thick. You leave tomorrow, I said instead. I do. Lady Esher tires of fresh air after a week of it, and I go where she goes. She turned then, and there was something behind the dryness, something she did not let reach her voice but could not quite keep from her eyes. I don't imagine that troubles your grace particularly. It troubles me considerably more than I intend to admit standing in a garden at dusk. That, at least, earned me her surprise, a small flicker, quickly smoothed. She turned to go on the strength of that flicker, as if leaving were the only dignified answer left to her, and her glove slipped from her hand and fell into the grass between us, gray, like the dress, plain as everything she wore and chose to wear plainly, as if plainness were its own kind of armor. She bent for it. I was faster, which surprised neither of us more than it surprised me, and I held it instead of returning it, turning the small worn thing over once in my hand the way a man turns over an excuse he is no longer sure he needs. Your Grace. It's mine now, I said. She went very still, the particular stillness of a woman doing the sum in her head and not yet trusting the answer it gave her. It's a glove. It is, I agreed, and I find I have no intention of returning it, and very little intention of confining the policy to gloves. I am not, by temperament, a man given to long declarations, and I did not manage one even then. I have never needed many words, once the true ones finally consent to arrive. I have been told the plain truth exactly once in 11 years, Miss Doyle, and it was by a woman with no lace on her dress and no fear of me whatsoever, at my own table, in front of 22 witnesses who laughed at me for it, and I find, 3 days on, that I cannot now do without either the truth or the woman who tells it. She did not smile the way the room had laughed that first night, wide and quick and at my expense. This was slower, and it reached all the way to some locked-away part of her, the part, I suspect, that had decided 4 years and 100 sharp answers ago that no man's title would ever again be permitted to frighten her into a smaller shape than the one she'd chosen for herself. Then I suppose, she said, you had better learn to eat your soup hot, your grace, because I intend to go on correcting you for a very long time yet. I am counting on it, I said, and meant it more than I had meant anything spoken at the table in 11 years, and took her hand instead of the glove, though I kept the glove as well, and have it still, in a drawer at Penhallow no one else is permitted to open. We were married that autumn, quietly, in the small chapel at Penhallow rather than the cathedral my mother had set her heart on, because Margaret said a chapel suited a man who'd only just learned to be corrected in private before he risked being corrected again in front of 100 guests. I did not argue the point. I had stopped winning those particular arguments months before, and discovered, to my lasting astonishment, that losing them was the finest feeling I had ever paid for with my pride. She still tells me, most days, when I am wrong. I have come to depend on it the way other men depend on the church bell to mark the hour, not as correction merely, but as proof that someone in this house is paying close enough attention to bother. It is, I have told her more than once, the truest gift anyone has given me since I came into this title, and she answers, every time, just as dry as the night I met her, that a duke who needs telling he is loved quite that often was clearly starved of it for a very long while before she arrived to see to the matter properly. She is not wrong. She rarely is. I stopped expecting her to be years ago, and started, instead, simply listening, which she will tell you, if you ask her, took me considerably longer to learn than my soup.